incense burning. All space is filled with the fragrance. All Buddhas smell it from afar. Auspicious clouds gather everywhere. With utmost sincerity, all Buddhas appear. We pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas. We pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas. We pay homage and offer clouds of incense to the Bodhisattvas and the Mahasattvas.
Blessed One, Shakyamuni Buddha, precious treasury of compassion, bestower of supreme inner peace, you who love all beings without exception, are the source of happiness and goodness, and you guide us to the liberating path. Your body is a wish-fulfilling jewel. Your speech is supreme purifying nectar, and your mind is refuge for all living beings. With folded hands I turn to you, supreme, unchanging friend. I request from the depths of my heart, please give me the light of your wisdom to dispel the darkness of my mind. with your goodness, that I in turn may nourish all beings with an unceasing banquet of delight. Through your compassionate intention, your blessings and virtuous deeds, and my strong will to rely upon you, may our suffering quickly cease, and all happiness and joy be fulfilled.
A different way of practicing. You know, practice is designed to help you to be able to play in the real game. So if you're talking about compassion and opening the heart, but you're doing it through the pragmatism of the mind, the heart is not going to open. The mind may open or expand, but the heart is not. And so this whole practice for this month is about understanding what true cultivation is. And we speak of bodhicitta, and we speak of it as the enlightened mind, but it means more closely the awakened heart, or the oceanic, or the vast heart. So if we look at all of our troubles in the world today, it doesn't have to do so much with our minds, because we have good minds, but it has to do with a lack of goodness in the heart. And that can be pretty touchy, because the mind's job is to make sure that we're okay. It's to take care of us. It's to protect the me. It's to give us the quickening that looks out for ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. It has its place. But the practice of the awakened beings throughout all space and time, and what has been their glory has been their heart for living beings. So it's not so much that we are made for things, but that things are made for us. And so this whole notion of rites and rituals and rules and all of this that we try to cram ourselves into is maybe approaching it from a backwards point of view. They're all there designed to help us, just like training wheels on a bicycle. So we don't live for the rule, but the rule is there for us, to help us to become more truly integrated, with all of life. And so I want to introduce you to the Mahayana Path. Now, between Theravada and Mahayana, there's just Buddhayana. I mean, because in this particular Dhamma enlightening age, there was Shakyamuni Buddha. There have been many, innumerable, uncountable Buddhas before him, and possibly Buddhas after him. It takes a Buddha to know a Buddha. So we can say there hasn't been, but how do we know unless we are? So I hold it pretty lightly when someone surfaces who seems to have that kind of oceanic view and oceanic mind, and I know that we're evaluating them from our own narrow view and our own narrow mind. So I just hold that lightly and don't proclaim one way or make a judgment one way or the other. I just simply look and see if they must have something that they can share with us in a way that opens up our understanding in an extraordinary way. So we are studying the Dhamma of cultivation that's been transmitted by Dorji Jang Buddha III, and this is my master's master, and it has taken me 10 years to meet him. And over those 10 years, I've just simply observed and just quietly tried to put into practice some of his teachings. But you know, there's many places you can sit in a house. You got the bathroom, you have the living room, you know, you got the attic, you got the basement, you got the furnace room, you got the kitchen. And so I like to choose a comfortable seat, you know, so I like to choose the living room or the bedroom. Well, being with Buddha masters like the furnace room is hot, you know, because he just points you right to the thing, and you have to decide what is your commitment. At that time, and my commitment in the beginning wasn't that great, but over the decade, my commitment has been growing and my resolve has been expanding. Not just because it has been, but because of the effort that I put forth to it in examining my own mind and examining my own heart in every circumstance and in every situation. And when the heart says, Panya, why do you need to work on that? Then I go back and I really do try to work on that. Some of those results are apparent and some of those are still in the works. And so that's how we can approach the Dhamma. So in one sense, the Buddha said, practice like your hair is on fire. And then on the other side of that, he talks about just taking it and holding it lightly, because anything that you clamp down around, you tighten around, and then you become constricted. So it's this paradox of how to be free-flowing and easy, and yet with a deep sincerity and a great earnestness that begins to impact and affect and to change the ways that we think, the ways that we speak, the ways that we act, and what we do and what we don't do. So the way that we replace behaviors is that we have to truly decide that they are not useful, they're not beneficial, and that they're not the behavior that I want. Until we come to that conclusion, we don't change them. It doesn't matter what that is, whether that's procrastination, whether that's laziness, whether that's being angry, whether that's being self-centered. I mean, it doesn't matter until we actually come to the conclusion, the firm conclusion that this is not serving me. It's not, I'm not developing into who I want to be. And my words of who I say I want to be don't line up with the actions I ultimately take. And once we get to that place, that's the point that the Dhamma can begin to help us. Up until that point, it's no help, because our conviction is not firm enough. It's not about anybody exterior to us. It's only about our own great wish. And so on one hand, he says, if people don't want to do more than what they do, leave them alone. On the other hand, he says, if they do, give them correct Dhamma. The difference between what we call correct Dhamma and incorrect Dhamma is whether one feeds our sense of self in a certain way, that it does not encourage the uprooting of the things that beset us, the thoughts and the behaviors that beset us. And so we cannot grow and we cannot advance. So if whatever Dhamma you're practicing does not have you growing and advancing and entering into your own great wish for what you call a cut above, ordinary thinking and ordinary being, then get rid of that Dhamma and get something else, because that's not really the true Dhamma. Sorry, this is falling around, so I'm going to do this. So Pannavati started last week with what is cultivation, and I know that it can be confusing because we're using a different language. So there was just the Buddha Dhamma, right? And then what happened was that different ones, even within the Buddha's own, Sangha, there were people who excelled or had an interest in different things. So we all don't have an interest in the same things, right? And so certain things that we hear invigorate us. We can look at them deeply. We want to research more. We want to step into that. And certain things don't interest us. So the first thing is to find out what interests you. If you don't know what interests you, then you just listen and wait for that thing which rises up in your heart. Sometimes it rises up and encourages us. Sometimes it rises up and it condemns us. It's like, oh, you could do better. Oh, that wasn't right. Oh, that's good. Do more of that. That kind of thing. That's what makes me feel really good. That's what, so it's coming to know oneself, what is in one's own heart, what's in one's own mind. So we have this kind of outward way of looking at the Dhamma so that we can see, trying to see others, and our Dhamma mostly pushes outward. But some of that has to do with the way we have trained in the past, where we have, correction was not seen or offered in an enlightening way, but in a clamping down, accusatory, judgmental kind of way. This is not for judgment, it's actually for release and for relief. I could say that a lot of the teachings that we've had in other spiritual disciplines, they're also for that. They just weren't offered in that way, just through people's own ignorance and not understanding, not comprehending the truth. And maybe there wasn't, maybe that's the way they were trained, and so they did it in the same way. But the Buddha talks to us about how we can encourage one another and at the same time point to the way of escape. It says in the Bible, I love that, it says with every temptation there is a way of escape. Because I'm like, God, why? I'm always being tempted. When good is with me, evil is always also there. And I'm like, God, why? And I found that scripture one day. It said, with every temptation, there is a way of escape. And I was like, there it is. I need to look for the way of escape from this situation. So it really falls back on us to look for the way of escape. Now, this kind of teaching is a kind of a slinky kind. It rolls in, it goes around in circles, and it keeps repeating. And the purpose of it is to inculcate the mind, to just keep repeating something in a certain way until ultimately it drops in. And it is also designed to uproot what is called scattered wisdom. Scattered wisdom is worldly wisdom. It might be wisdom, and it's useful for living in the world, but it's not the kind of wisdom that can apprehend spiritual wisdom. Takes a different kind. It's a different kind of wisdom. Sometimes Amy says to me, like, why are you doing that? Why are you? It doesn't make sense after what they did or what they said, and so it doesn't make sense in a worldly way. It doesn't. It is not beneficial in a certain way, but it depends on what you count as suffering, loss versus gain. So sometimes, let's say that we are arguing for our view, and we're with our friend. And I've seen friends break up over a differing view around one little thing that really doesn't even matter that much, and the whole friendship is broken. And so the question might be in that situation, do you want to be right, or do you want to keep your friend? How important is it for you? Is it more important than your friendship? And sometimes you can decide, yes, it really is. If so, go at it. Sometimes you can decide that this is not. We disagree right here, but we agree on so many other. How sweet and pleasant it is to dwell together in unity with my friend. See, it's just this kind of way of working with the mind and training the mind to be with every situation and to decide how to get the best or make the best out of every situation. And so I wanted to review a little bit from last week, and I wanted to answer any questions that there were. One particular question was about reincarnation versus rebirth linking consciousness, right? That was a question from last week. Okay, so it's like if I have an oak tree and an acorn drops to the ground and it gets rain and it gets water or whatever, and if you're warm and you want to lift the windows, you can for some air. And then a new little oak tree starts to grow. And one could say that it's not the original oak tree because it's not. But it came from that oak tree, so in another sense, it's not that oak tree. It's something like that. So it is and it isn't. Part of our great delusion is that everything has to be black or white for us. That is the duality, the mind of duality. That we have a difficulty conceiving of something being this and this. And once we break through that, that is the strongest hold that there is over our minds, this notion of duality. It's this or it's this. And if it is this, it can't possibly be this. So the Buddha was constantly dealing with that. He didn't call it the doctrine of non-duality, but he was constantly dealing with it. He would say it's this. On some occasions, he would say it's this. On other occasions, and some times he would say it's this and it's this. And then at another teaching, he say it's not this and it's not this. You know, so what he was doing was uprooting all of our conceptions of what it is based on the assessment we make from our six consciousnesses that are attached to outer phenomena. And he says to really understand what this is, you're not going to be able to use your eyes and your ears and so forth. That it's going to take the accessing of a different kind of consciousness, for lack of a better word. That perfect consciousness that's not influenced by any outer tuition, by any outer observation, any outer teaching, any outer input. He says, and then you have to keep folding in and in and in until you touch that no-thingness, that space within that is not separate from anything that is outer. And then you come to know that altogether. And that is something like, and that's words too. That's just words. But once one starts to have a direct experience of these things, then one has the confidence to go further and further into them because they know that it is so. And that there is the reward. We don't call it reward, we call it fruit. You know, there is the fruit of the examination or the fruit of the investigation. There is the fruit of the practice. There is the fruit of the effort. There is the fruit of the, I could say there is the insight and there is the fruit of the insight. So insight is a fruit of practice, but then there is the actual abiding in the insight that is the fruit of the insight. So we talked last week about, so in that sense, don't let rebirth linking consciousness and reincarnation concern you so much, because they're words very difficult to describe what is actually happening. If we think of reincarnation, however, if we've learned it as rebirth linking consciousness, we think of it as being attached to our present personage or personhood. So like Pannavati is reincarnating. But within the context of the Mahayana language, it's not that this person right here is reincarnating. It's more like this person right here is just another arising of that individuated consciousness since time immemorial. Or it means that there is the constant rolling around in samsara since beginningless time. Now, everybody says time must have had a beginning. You know, I thought it was the craziest thing when I first heard that Buddhists don't believe that there was in the beginning. There's got to be a beginning. And now I think it's the craziest thing to think there is a beginning, because what came before the beginning? These are the things that, you know, some people like to spend all day talking about. Buddha said, don't waste your time. He said, because in the present state of mind, you'll never understand it. So the question can come up, but hold the questions lightly. Don't get bogged down in that. Just lift the weights. And if we lift the weights, we will get the fruit, the reward, the benefit of the lifting, as opposed to the ripping apart all of the talk. And so in Mahayana, we're pointing towards how to just cultivate and have the good heart and see the wisdom, the insight, and the power to live life meaningfully that comes from cultivating the good heart. There's something else that comes with it. It's a kind of spontaneity, you know, so we don't have to think so much about what to do or how to do. There becomes a spontaneous movement in accord with arising conditions. You don't have to have a meeting with 15 people. You don't have to, do all these charts, and that's the way the intellectual thinking mind does. But when one's heart becomes oceanic, it posits itself right in the center of the present moment. And when something arises, one knows how to respond to that. If something arises and one does not know how to respond, one doesn't think they know. One knows they don't know. You know, that's good, you know, because a lot of times we think we know, you know, and we don't know. But it's good to know we don't know. And that's not a put down. That's like such a relief. Like right here, yeah, I know what to do. I don't know. You know, and I can be open then. I can be open to that part of the universe of which I'm not at all separate from, to get some insight about how to move or how to respond in that moment. And so that you'll find that as you grow spiritually, you'll become very spontaneous. I mean, you'll see something that needs to be done, and it's just immediately, you just take care of that. And without any thought that I am doing, and without any thought I have done that. It's just the doing, because one sees that it can be done, that it would be good if it was done, and I'm right here and I can do it. And not looking for anything out of that, not looking for anything to come back to one. This is a deepening of love that becomes impersonal. When we think of something being impersonal, we think of it being removed, or because we have a kind of touchy-feely notion to, like, I gotta, like, really feel you before I help you, or I gotta, I really have to think through this. But instead of thinking just immediately, if one is suffering, how I would feel if I was suffering. I would just want my suffering relieved. And if I didn't know how to relieve my suffering, but I would do anything I thought would relieve it. And sometimes that would be the absolute thing that would not relieve it and would cause suffering for others. But because I don't know that, that's the very thing that I do. But if I am one who realizes that, because I myself have responded in that same way, I myself have caused people suffering, I myself have done things that were self-destructive and destructive to others, then I would recognize that when another one does it, they do it out of their desperation, they do it out of their ignorance, they do it out of their not knowing. And that opens the door for us to love the unlovable. It's easy to love people that love you. It's not so easy to love people that don't love you. So if there's any work that's going to be put in, it's loving the unlovely. The first way is by recognizing that they're not unlovely just because we decide they're unlovely, that they're not worthy of love. Even Jeffrey Dahmer, loved his mother and had a mother that loved him. So we can look at something from just our space and make a total judgment upon people. We do have to decide, what is our position in a situation, and the wisdom and understanding of what to do, when, how, and why increases as we grow, as we practice, as we contemplate, as we ponder, and as we put forth effort to overcome our own hindrances and our own habitual tendencies. And so we know, most of us, what our habitual tendencies are. And we know the ones that are good and the ones that are not so good. And the ones that are good, he says, great, you should increase them. He says the ones that are not so good, you should transform them. You're the only one that can. There's no outside agency. There's no God. There's no Buddha. There's no director. There's no person. There's no captain. There's no outside agency that can make us do good. We decide. And knowing, though, that we can decide is an awakening for a lot of people, because a lot don't know that they even can decide. If it's too warm, you can open the door. You can even open the door if you like. I don't want to put the air conditioning on yet. So, rebirth linking consciousness would be, I'll give you a theoretical way that Theravadins understand it. Would be like, if I commit an action and the fruit of that has not ripened, because I have instigated it, I have set something in motion, and it will come to its ripening. Sometimes these things ripen quickly. Like somebody slapped me and I immediately slapped them back. I'm not saying that's a good thing or not a good thing. I'm just saying that's an instant ripening. Sometimes someone can malign your name and people believe it, simply because in our unenlightened state, people really would rather believe a lie than the truth, because we're always looking for something dastardly, because we're in a kind of negative bent. That's just part of the condition of suffering. You know, so you don't have to have too many expectations of people then, right? Right. It's only when you're expecting people to always do the right thing that you're going to suffer. But when you don't have any expectation, like you hope they do the right thing, but you are accepting if they don't. So let's say, so somebody maligns your name and the truth doesn't come out for a decade. That's a decade of suffering that one could have gone through. Or they could just know what is true and there's nothing else to do about that. Okay, so there was a ripening, say a decade later, where they find out that wasn't true, or the person who made that up confesses, or they observed and they worked it out and they see, you know, like that's not true. Okay, so we could say that that fruit ripened, but it took a long time for it to ripen. So some things ripen immediately, some things ripen over a long period of time. Some fruit never ripens in your lifetime. So somebody will murder somebody, they never caught him. In this lifetime, there was never a recompense for that. Yeah. And all of that's about the being in samsara, conditioned existence, that has as its rule of operation a rule of law or rule of order, cause and condition. So we live in a world of cause and condition. When this is, this comes about. This is. When this isn't, this isn't. And if we want to take out some of our pain and suffering, we have to look at the things that create it. Sometimes that's the things to stop doing certain things. Sometimes it's a change of location. Stop being with certain people. Stop going certain places. You know, so we have to decide what it is that we need to do to change the fruit that's going to come forth. I used to like to hang out at night when I was young. And one day, you know, my pastor was preaching. She was preaching on me, and she was talking about night crawlers, you know. And I got so offended, you know, because when you're young, when you're in your 20s, and you're hanging out and you're drinking, and you know, nighttime, you don't go out till it gets dark. You know, that's when the party starts. So I'm like, she's just old, you know. But as I began to develop spiritually, you know, I started feeling like nighttime was for sleeping. You know, that was when the body was folding in. Now, it's not because I was getting old, but my vision and view of what I wanted began to shift and change. And then I didn't feel like going out at night. I wanted to wake up refreshed in the morning instead of hungover. I wanted to be alert for my work and, you know, and for my family, instead of just looking for the next party. I mean, things shifted as my desires shift. So rebirth linking consciousness says that if the fruit has not ripened in this lifetime, and there is the separation of mentality and materiality, mind and body separate, then that seed has already been planted in a kind of consciousness. And that consciousness then searches for a suitable host to bring about its ripening. It's like that. And when it finds a suitable host for what is ripening next, it enters. So if it doesn't enter, you know, then they have what they call like stillborn child, or so there is a condition for the consciousness being present because it holds the body it takes the two, mind and body, to create another sentient or living being. Not just human, but human and animal, And there's lots of classifications. We call these gross material because we can see them. And then they also are beings that we can't see. And because we're not at the top of the pecking order, we're not at the highest level of consciousness, and we don't have. Even ants have better instincts and senses than we do. You ever watch ants? And they have abilities. I watch ants trying to get over a puddle of water, and they crawled one upon the back of the other and made a bridge, and then they let all of them cross, and then the last ones came across, stuck to each other's, legs or tentacles or whatever things that they have. And I was like blown away. It was so amazing to me. I'm like, an ant, But we think of these creatures as being less than us. They're not less. They're just different, and different is not deficient. It's why we should have respect for all living things. And so, so when there is a suitable host, and it may not even be in a human body, it's suitable for what's ripening. It's suitable for the energy that's ripening. Whether you're a lion, a hyena, a hungry ghost, a human being, and so that's the Buddhist cosmology when we get beyond mindfulness to be happy with our things. So it starts to speak to where we are in the whole scheme, of things. And you can use any of it that's useful for you, and you can discard any that's not, because no wine before its time. You can't make something ripen. There is a time, an appointed time of ripening. And that's when one is ready and when the conditions have been met for things to ripen. So sometimes we're like ready, but the conditions are not right. Sometimes the conditions are right and we're not ready. Sometimes neither of those factors are present, so nothing can be done. And sometimes both of those factors are present, and so much can be done. So sometimes if you're looking at things and you may be frustrated in your life and you're wondering, why is this not happening? We have to consider, one can consider, which of these four circumstances that is. Then one can consider, I am not in this world alone. I make a decision, but you also make a decision. Your decision definitely impacts me in some form or some fashion, in some way. So we are interdependent in a certain way. And if we could understand that we are interdependent, it would alter the way we relate to each other, especially if we're close. We should see more exactingly our interdependence and how everything that we do together promotes or tears down. Or we could see how whatever one fails to do, tears down or keeps something from coming into being. And if we do this, we start to know where we should be, and our view changes. We become actively, engaged in the places that we go with the people that the people that we meet. This is how we change in our families, in our jobs, you know, the places that we go for recreation, or just walking down the street. I remember when Pannavati and I were in the monastery in, I think I was in Fremont, and where you and Kay used to sneak out and go to Starbucks, and I'd sneak out sometimes because they could go out freely, but I was told I couldn't leave, I couldn't go out, and I got upset because they could go out and I couldn't go out. Well, Master was trying to deal with me in a certain way. She was trying to help me to see and overcome a particular propensity that I had, and so I was upset that I couldn't go out, and I would sneak out sometimes. And when I came back, she always would be standing right there where I was sneaking back in on the ground. They come in the front door, but I'm finding, cut through the side fence or something, and she'd stand there like this, and she'd just say, "You have such a dirty mind." And she'd proceed to tell me all the things that I said about her while I was at Starbucks, and I said, "I didn't give you permission to be in your mind." She said, "You did when you asked me to be your master." And so I said, "Well, take that part out. That part I don't give you permission. I don't give you permission for." But in time, in some ways, not fully, but in some ways, I came to understand some of the things now that she was pointing me to then. So we don't always get it, at the time. Sometimes, the time is right, but the commitment is not there. Sometimes the time is not right, even though the commitment is there. And for me, at that time, was a little bit of both of those things, And so no harm, no foul on either side, no blame on either side. But she told me, she said, "Now, when you walk down the street, that man that was crippled that walked up the street, his disease jumped off on you, and now it's in your body. Now I have to go upstairs and work to get that off because you don't even know that it's there." Now, I could accept that was true because I remember walking down the street and seeing the crippled guy walk up the street, and I had such compassion for him. I mean, my heart just opened up. It's like I could feel his pain, but in opening up in that way, not having the proper development, I just opened myself up in our oneness, and I got it, and I got his disease. It's things like this that happen in the world all the time. We don't always know the reasons, but sometimes we can know the reasons, or at least sometimes we can prevent some things from happening. There was, at the retreat I was doing it, is this recorded? Mm-hmm. Okay, let me think. So I was doing a retreat recently, and a person came to me, and she was so upset at the break. She said, "I gotta talk to you, I gotta talk to you." I said, "Okay, we'll talk." And then she went to tell me that the man that killed 50 people a few weeks ago, I think it was it in Texas?
New Zealand?
Oh, right. Where was it? No, this was the one that just happened.
New Zealand.
New Zealand? Okay. All right, okay. In New Zealand, and killed 50 people. She said, he came to me 3 times in my dreams, but I didn't know him, and I didn't, it was just something, how people show up in your dreams, that's just it. She said, but then when that happened, she said, and I feel so condemned, like there was something I was supposed to do, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, I feel like somehow I let that happen, and I have this kind of guilt, like I can hardly function. So she said, but since it's happened, he's come to me twice. And it's not coming in my dreams, but physically I feel his presence. And I don't know what to do about it. So that's a tough position, for me to be in, to have to respond to something like this. And truly this person was suffering. And I didn't know what to tell her, So I simply said, all living beings in countless eons since beginningless time have been your mother and your sister and your brother. That's what the Mahayanas teach. That if we've been here since beginningless times in some form, in some body, in some incarnation, that we are really all related, or we should think of each other as our mother. Now that's how they train in loving kindness. They don't say or generate loving kindness for oneself, and then for someone close to them, and then for their friend, and then they just start training the mind or inculcating the mind with the thought that every single person is my mother. Now that was difficult for me, and I started in Mahayana because I had an issue with my mother. I'm like, well, no wonder I'm so angry. If every living being, I need to think of them as my mother. That just was not helpful to me at all. So I talked to my teacher about it. He said, well then, think of it as the ideal of the perfect mother, the expectation you have of a mother. And then I was able to do it. A mother should be this, should be that, should be the other. I was none of those things as a mother myself. So now I understand firsthand how one can have a good intention and utterly fail. But because I understand, I don't judge myself as a mother, because I am caught in the same ignorance as my mother was, and anybody's mother who was not, who did not have the capacity due to causes and conditions to offer the kind of love and care that the child needed. That's it. So it's in this way that I forgive my mother, I forgive myself, and I forgive any mother I see out here that I have an inclination to judge. This is how we uproot the judging mind. Now, when we uproot the judging mind, we're in a better position then to resolve an outer matter. But until we uproot the judging mind, it's difficult for us to undertake an action with a certain purity and with a certain goodness. That's why we work so much on just looking at our own neck of the woods, right? Okay, so then this Gandhava is called. That's that rebirth linking consciousness, because Buddha talked about, you have the eye consciousness, the ear consciousness, the nose consciousness, the mind consciousness. So we've got these 6 consciousnesses that attach or put us in connection with the outer world, right? And then there is the rebirth linking. So there are 2 additional consciousnesses, and that's one that puts them all together, and out of which we form a view or a perception that's informed by all these different things. And then we have the rebirth linking consciousness that holds any unripened fruit, and that consciousness comes together with a sperm, in the human case, with the sperm and the egg, and he talks about other things that are not born of an egg, but for humans, sperm and egg, and it creates a new being, like the acorn dropping from the tree into the soil. So the life is in both the body from our parents and the Gandhava, rebirth linking consciousness, not from our parents. And that's why families can be such a challenge. You're like, where did they come from? And why am I in this family? Because the rebirth linking consciousness does not come. Okay? So whether we call it reincarnation, there's another being emerging. Don't think of it as one being coming back again and again and again, but one being a link. For instance, if I lit one candle and then I lit the second candle from the first candle, something like that. Or if I were running a relay and when I got to the end of my running point and I passed the baton on to the other one, they grab it and they run on with it. It's something like that. Any one of those analogies to help you kind of understand that concept. But what understanding this concept does, and the mind doesn't know whether something is real or memorex, right? So if you keep thinking something is happening, something is really happening in your mind, that's real to you. That's what I'm saying. So whether it's real or even whether it's not real, if it's something that sweetens and changes the mind and gives one the capacity to love absolutely and fearlessly, it is worthy to be undertaken. The only thing worthy to be abandoned is whatever view you have, how right it is, that doesn't help you. So, were there any other questions about last week? Okay, believe it or not, we're going to get, oh shoot, can you all give me 10 more minutes? Is anybody who can't? Okay. All right, so we're at page 5. So the essence of Buddhist practice lies in carrying out what we learn in cultivation. And cultivation then is to leave the cycle of this rebirth, to liberate ourselves from suffering, to become a holy being and persevere until we become fully awakened. That's the purpose of cultivation. That's the purpose of our practice. So this law of cause and effect cannot be eliminated. To say that it can is to take a nihilistic point of view. Hence, we can only build a wall of good karma, which is like building a retaining wall. And this wall of good karma has the effect of blocking or preventing the ripening of unfortunate karma. So the more good things we do, the more we create a safeguard that in a way insulates or protects us from our not so good things. Yeah. So if the object is not to do enough good things to block the bad things I want to do, right? It's not for that. But it is for us to get more and more in the habit of doing what is useful, beneficial, and wholesome. And we'll have less of a desire for doing things that are selfish, self-centered, and harmful. There will become a shift, and ultimately the Buddha calls that the changing of lineage. Okay. And so this is on page 4, this story, there are many tales called the Jataka tales where the Buddha told of all his, the different lifetimes that his mind stream, that he recalled as he recounted the various lifetimes. And he uses, for simplicity of words, he said, in a previous life I was this, and before that I was this person. I lived in this village. My name was such and such, and we did thus and so. And before that was something else. And he went back. And this is an example of when he saw beings suffering in hell, and he jumped down into hell to assist them. But because in his own mind, the purity of his own mind, when he jumped in, it's like hell couldn't hold him. Hell transformed, because wherever he was, it would not be possible for there to be hell. And so you'll find in your life that your conditions change as your mind changes. And there will come the time when certain things are just not possible, to appear in your life. And that comes about solely about your practice. And when I say it's not possible to appear, it may be in a physical sense that it's not possible. Some things are not possible. It may be in the sense that they appear and there's absolutely no suffering with it. I mean, it's like a happening, but one is not suffering at all. So one person can have a 5-cent incident going on, and they can be suffering worth $10. There can be another person that has a $10 incident going on, and they're not suffering worth 5 cents. So in both of these ways, one can find freedom from outer conditions and from an inner ability to hold conditions. This is not pretending things are not happening. So it's not like being off in la-la land and pretending something's not happening. It's being able to say that absolutely is happening, and yet I can remain steady and stable and unmoved in it. That's the difference. So he defines on page 6 for us cultivation. Cultivation is to leave the cycle of reincarnation, to liberate yourself from all suffering, become a holy being, and persevere until you become a Buddha. And usually the way that we do it is that we read it, but you'll have the book you can go back and read later, because it's very difficult to listen and to read. We start to get wrapped around the written word, and then the mind starts tearing that apart. So I'd like for you to just listen, but I'm just letting you know where I'm starting at page 5. To leave the cycle of reincarnation, we must establish a mind of renunciation. So you can close your books. A mind that is determined to leave this cycle of reincarnation that I just talked about, or rebirth linking consciousness. A mind of firm belief, a mind also, though, with immovable vows. That means making a decision to live a certain way, or to want to think a certain way, and then taking a vow of action that helps you to do that. A mind of diligence, being diligent, like I'm not thinking about doing good when I'm laying in bed getting ready to go to sleep for the night, but when you're yelling at me and I'm thinking she needs to step back, and then that mind comes up and says she needs to step back. It's like, oh, that's the wrong view, Pannavati. Listen to what she's saying. Hear her. See where she's suffering. And if I turn from me, like how I'm feeling, what's rising up at that moment, and turn to her, you know what it does? First of all, it uproots my fear of the other. Our fear, we may have had an incident in our life that caused us, some pain, and then that incident gets embedded even in our cellular structure, and we have this continuing fear. So we have to take back our own power, and we do that with the mind and with action. And it might be scary at first, but we can do it. So a mind of diligence. How can I be diligent in this moment to my great wish, to my vow? How can I be attentive? How can I be available? And the Mahayana, or the great single bodhicitta, awakened heart, the great single awakened heart, Maha Bodhicitta. All real states emanating from this kind of mind rely upon and are based upon right view. Without right view, all states of mind will be inverted, self-focused, and confused. In other words, you will not experience beneficial effects from cultivation that lacks right view. For example, if you want to practice bodhicitta first, you will not be successful. So some of us are trying to cultivate bodhicitta, but we don't have right view. Therefore, when we're trying to act responsibly or compassionately, it's a erroneous compassion that just makes the problem worse, because we have not established the right view. So we're helping the one who shouldn't be helped, and we're not helping the one that should be helped. We're siding with the one who looks the most pitiful, who is really doing the most damage, and yet overlooking the one who is correct. We can't unravel it. We can't figure it out. Sometimes we do that based on what's troubling us. Like what our need is, or what it is we want from people, or what it is we need. And so we respond or we react with them, not because we're doing it out of the goodness of our heart, but because we need it, And so in a way, this kind of growth and development, when I talk about it, love being impersonal, it truly is, because it covers everybody. If it covers everybody, then it's no particular people that it becomes greater for. And in that moment, they asked Thich Nhat Hanh, and I will have to end. So I'm going to tell you what you can read for this week. If you read up through page 7. Well, actually, page 8. And you can stop if you turn to page 8 now. To understand what cultivation is, you must understand the 8 fundamental right views related to learning Buddhism and cultivation, because that's where I'll pick up next week. So you don't have to read the 8 fundamental views. Just stop before you get to the 8 fundamental views. How many people can I trust to stop before you get to the 8 fundamental views? I like to see hands. Okay. All right. And it's important, it's important that you not go ahead, because it needs to be paced in a certain way, and the thoughts need to be introduced in a certain way. So I'm asking you to not go ahead for that reason. So some of us, as I'm closing, are really trying to practice bodhicitta, trying to have an open, vast heart, but they have not cultivated a desire to leave the cycle of birth and death, just cause and condition, continually committing acts of thought, speech, or actual action that produce a result, because they're still thinking about I am thinking, I am speaking, I am doing. So a mind of renunciation is really about uprooting the continual reference of everything from a place of I-ness. And that's really what renunciation is all about. Okay. Thank you for coming today. Are there any questions? I know there are, so just think about them and let them ruminate within oneself. It's better not to have every question answered. We learn how to think through something. That's how we get insights. I know this might be a challenge for some of you, but I ask you to continue with us this month. It's wonderful to learn something. I'll just put a period right there. Life gets pretty boring if all there is to know is what I already know. May you be well and happy and peaceful. May no harm come to you, no danger. May you always meet with the inevitable difficulties of life.